by the end of next year, 80% of our audiences are going to be unknown. And it's not just from a targeting perspective, you're not going to be able to measure anything. We've been trying to just struggle and force retail media to be a media business. Look at ways in which you can, use probabilistic data or synthetic controls to kind of deduce a grouping or cohorted performance across retailers. But we need to move away from this obsession of one-to-one.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, it's time to put ourselves in the shoes of advertisers, publishers, and retailers. And we're going to do it with a top guest, which is Jeffrey Bustos. Jeffrey is the VP of Measurement, Addressability Data, and Commerce at the IAB, where he develops industry standards and guides. He has a really good, deep understanding of retail media networks and their associated privacy implications, and leads or participates in some well-known IAB projects like those involving retail media, of course, data clean rooms, highly related, or attention and engagement metrics standards. He previously worked at GroupM, leading data and audience strategy for e-commerce solutions. And what are we going to talk about? Primarily, how does retail media solve addressability in a cookieless world? How do multiple retailers work together in what we are calling a marketplace? Can we measure ad performance without one-to-one deduplication or processing data of every single individual? Should we care about any other privacy angles? Let's get started. Jeffrey, thanks for coming.
Yeah, Sergio, thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you today.
It's a pleasure. How do you define retail media in your words?
Retail media is essentially the strategic and data capability in which retailers are enabling their first-party data within a privacy consented ecosystem that allows advertisers not just to reach their audiences, but have scale, have that personalization. And I think finally the most important part is that closed loop measurement. But retail media in itself, I see it as just an extension of data collaboration. And as more of these commerce media players emerge, we're going to see more data collaboration across retailers and other companies.
Okay, so if it is an extension, in a way, it's an extension of the first party data move. Is that a correct assumption?
I think it's an extension of beyond first party data. It's an extension on how you can really start delivering an omni-channel experience, because you can develop a social strategy, search strategy and everything, but I think companies are starting to realize that they're very siloed and there's not that consistent messaging across the various touch points. And retail media kind of really exposed the fragmentation that these companies have, and how can you have a more seamless conversation with the consumer.
So you have retailers, to start with something simple, like Albertsons, that were part of a panel recently where you were moderating. Albertsons or Kroger or whoever, Walmart, they own the first party relationship and they have some inventory. So from their point of view, are they all trying to emulate Amazon?
I think that there's a distinction. Obviously, the play obviously is data monetization, which is very valuable. How can you combine data and media? And then obviously, at least within the US, and this will impact us globally with cookies going away. Obviously, we've lost, most of the signals with IDFA. But the play is allowing advertisers to still be able to have concise targeting, uh, ability to have scale and have measurement. Once with IDF, with once cookies go away, and you're already seeing this in Europe, the opt-in rates for targeting and measurement are so low that like by the end of next year, 80% of our audience is going to be unknown. And it's not just from a targeting perspective, you're not going to be able to measure anything. So retail media is a really convenient solve that is really lucrative for brands as they try to continue having that relationship with consumers. And I think that one of the interesting things is that retail media is obviously started from a commerce perspective. From COVID, people were all buying stuff online. Retailers had to cover the cost. There was an opportunity, but we're in a post-COVID world, and consumers went back to the stores. 80% of consumers still buy in store. Obviously, I think in Europe it's like a little bit lower. It's like 675 or 70. Um, but most of the sales either way are still happening in store. And what retailers are now really trying to do is they're really trying to evaluate that full omnichannel experience. And I think that is the evolution of retail media, is not so much like what can you do within your own on-site properties, but like how can you create that full experience on you being in store, you being online, you watching television. Because I think we have all these tools to target a consumer, but we kind of forget sometimes that we're consumers. Like I am not just online and then I'm in store. I'm walking in the aisles of like Walmart, Target, or Kroger on my phone, on social media, looking at um, promotions. And I think that's where retailers are trying to really have that balance. And that's why you're seeing Amazon trying to really, accelerate their in-store, because that is a huge value that I think that they may not have that competitive advantage compared to other retailers.
That's a very good point. Okay, so sort of the solo play, to put it like that, is not as important based on what you say. I understand Amazon has so much data and such a strong relationship and sort of closing the whole, funnel within their walls, that for them it may make sense. But what I am getting from this is that other retailers, they already start as sort of team players from the outset. So there's two sides based on what you're saying. One is I want to capitalize, I want to make the most of the omni-channel experience, since I've got stores and I've got loyalty cards, so I can map across, all of the digital touch points. And then at the same time, there's the fact that I know that I'm never going to have enough of a standalone audience to go out there in the market and reach advertisers or offer something of volume. So by being part of an ecosystem, then I am going to contribute what I'm learning through these omni-channel experiences. Am I missing something?
Well, I think right now retailers, at least the large ones, have the ability to have that scale. I do think that we're going to see the rise of marketplaces. The Trade Desk, Criteo, Pomatic, they've all, and Microsoft have all launched marketplaces. It's only a matter of will retailers adopt them. But yeah, I think marketplaces will be where we kind of see that continuation. And one of the things that you mentioned is that there is that importance of understanding the relationship. So retail media is the trade business and media business converged. And I think that we've been trying to just struggle and force retail media to be a media business, and we're forcing it to be a trade business. And I think that's wrong. I think we need to focus on like, okay, how do we bring these together? And I think that a lot of brands are now, going to these JBP negotiations. They're looking at retail media as a full holistic strategy. How can I make sure that when I'm talking to my sales team on the trade team, I have full alignment and my trade team understands what's going to be happening in media, and we can negotiate, because getting better end caps, or getting specific space within store and being able to tie that to an online experience is incredibly powerful, because 80% of sales happen in store, 60% of the sales are influenced online. And until we're brands are fully integrated, which they're not. Brands don't talk to each other, which is like the biggest miss for them. And I think that a lot of them are realizing that, and they're trying to create centers of excellence and unifying that communication. And I think that's where the value of retail media will kind of evolve over the next, I would see a lot, right? We're seeing a lot now, and it will continue to evolve in that direction.
I think it'd be welcome for consumers to feel that there's a balance between retail and media, and that I find whatever I am looking for, but that by integrating, by talking to the brands and helping them be more relevant because they can somehow share their traits with my needs or cross or exchange or somehow, make them part of the search, that I get relevance and they get to sell more. But how do you see that vertical alignment or that collaboration between CPG, for example, and the retailer?
Well, I mean, I think this is something that we've seen across all programmatic. I don't think it's new to retail media. I think the market corrects itself. I think that, at the end of the day, a lot of retailers are looking on not just, the bid, but also the page quality, the product quality reviews, and all of that goes into the bid. So if you are having a better product, a better experience for the user, then you are going to probably be able to win that auction better at a lower price. So a lot of retailers are starting to kind of, that's how programmatic works. So I think that, a lot of what, the retailers, they're still selling products on, online and in store. And I think they do understand that, yes, retail media is very lucrative, but they do want to continue to, you know, they still need to push their main business, which is selling product inventory. And I think that's where we have seen that value in retail media. It's a $45 billion industry. E-commerce delivers, over $1 trillion in sales yearly. And that happened, post pandemic. And so it's definitely a huge market. And yes, there's a lot of competition in the space. Yes, the advertising has changed a lot of it, but I think that consumers are seeing that value, and brands are able to really connect with consumers. I think that, the point would be how genuine you can be with consumers. Because yeah, you could, monetize the same way a brand could monetize a product, or a retailer could monetize it. Long term, if you're not delivering that consumer experience, that value exchange, it's not going to continue. But I think that with retail media, we have seen that consumer experience is being outweighed, and we're seeing, much stronger performance. Like if I'm at a retailer store, I want to make sure that like my online coupon experience and my messaging is the same. I want to understand if I see an ad, if I'm home right now and I want to buy cereal, and I go to the retailer's website and I see an ad for it, I want to make sure that when I get to that retailer, there is that cereal. So, I think a lot of retailers are trying to ensure that there is a specific levels of inventory for when I do go in store, I can get the product, because they do understand that I might search online and then just stop in the store just to buy it. And I think that that's where we're seeing a lot of the evolution, is like, how do you really look at consumers as hybrid shoppers and not as like, oh, you're online and offline? Because I think that we don't really exist like that anymore.
But something that is actually happening is when you look at the numbers, so you were saying, right, these are the sales numbers, revenue numbers, but looking at only Amazon, as in their books, the Everything Store, and whichever was the title of the follow-up, I enjoyed those books. But I remember that something that called my attention is that after so many years working from the point of view of the customer, right, so many years sacrificing margin for growth, then the minute they touched the advertising business, the margins are gigantic, are much, much bigger. So if I am a retailer, even though my core business is retail, if I've got a 3% margin on whichever massive revenue I generate, and all of a sudden I discover this golden goose that gives me a much higher margin, it's very tempting to then put the customer aside. I know it's very short term. In the long term, you would struggle, but it's very tempting to just turn your attention towards being more of a media and less of a retailer, right?
I would disagree. I think that, retailers know that brands are only going to invest in retail media long term if they can deliver growth. Like, I am not going to continue increasing my retail investment if I don't see, visual and sustainable category growth, ROAS efficiencies, revenue growth, conversions, increasing basket size, increasing increments in new buyers. So I think that if you think about it that way, yes, but I don't, I think that retailers, if you think about it from a game theory perspective, you lose. So I think that retailers are very much aware that yes, it is very a lucrative business, but I think that they understand that if they want to continue this lucrative business, then they need to ensure that they are delivering that performance. And what we are seeing a lot right now is that brands are demanding kind of like the justification and increase investments. Brands are demanding kind of that more closer look at how things are being measured, and that's why we developed the measurement standards for retail media, which were up public comment. And the objective there is like, how can we ensure that there's consistency in how things are being measured so that a brand can easily compare performance across various retailers and then also have the transparency to know what not only what a metric means, but the methodology in which that metric was derived, which I think is really important. So I think that retailers, it's something that, and also like I think with retail media, there was a cost burden that retailers had with the increased level of e-commerce. The supply chain of e-commerce is not cheap. So, and brands wanting to continue selling online. So there needs to be a way that, retailers can monetize that and cover those costs. And I think that, as we continue e-commerce, I think this will continue to evolve to see how you can, really deliver that consumer experience. Like we saw the rise of buy online, pick up in store, and all these different things that really didn't exist pre-pandemic. So I think it was kind of the convergence of various different events.
So, the reason why you're coming up with new standards or proposed guidelines is that there's disparities. Every retailer will provide different metrics and so on. Is there a way to provide addressability to advertisers without individual deduplication? I'm stepping into the privacy arena, but is there a way to provide addressability if you deal with a retailer directly and just one before we enter the marketplace world? How is addressability and how are metrics offered? In the absence of one-to-one deduplication. How does it work?
So within a single retailer, I think that they're working right now to do deduplication across different ad formats. If it's or attribution of click based versus impression based. Also, as they expand their ecosystem to offsite, is like how do you dedupe someone across both environments? And obviously, that's done through identity graphs, and it's all through consented data. And all the data, there's no, through the data user data clean rooms and APIs, there's very minimal data leakage in which the user is never identified. It's just an aggregated that. But I think that, not I think, one of the limitations we put on the measuring guidelines and something that I do very strongly believe in terms of privacy is that we do want to get across retailer evaluation. The ability for you to compare retailer A to retailer B, but there are serious privacy implications if you want to do cross retailer attribution. What was the impact of this ad on this retailer? Because then you're having to like truly have just sending people's data and identity across multiple different ecosystems. And that does have significant privacy implications. And you could even say that a consumer probably didn't consent to that. And, retailers are very careful with that. And, they're very much huge proponents of privacy, and they're really working, they're striving to ensure that there's none of that data leakage. So I think that, yes, it's a nice thing and it seems like a great idea from an advertiser point of view, and advertisers are asking for that. But I think that that is a very dangerous thing to kind of move towards that direction because, cookies didn't go away, or legislation on cookies isn't because cookies are a bad technology. Cookies are creepy. And that's why they're being legislated, because there was the issue of consent and how people's data was just being traded in data brokers. And I think that we need to, as we move forward in the industry with whatever solution, we got to make sure don't be creepy and get consent. So there is conversations on how you can aggregate the data. How can you maybe look at ways in which you can, use probabilistic data or synthetic controls to kind of deduce a grouping or cohorted performance across retailers, but we need to move away from this obsession of one-to-one
Excellent.
because it's
Yeah.
creepy, especially if you get that. I mean, if you have consent, obviously different, but I think it's okay to have cohort groupings. We're not that different, people like to think that they're very individual and they're very special, but our shopping behaviors are pretty consistent across the board, that it's okay for us to be cohorted and reported in that direct way instead of being targeted one-to-one.
I love that. I was going to ask you that. That was going to be my last question. In fact, whether you saw any future in using cohorts. Um, I'm constantly thinking about this, and I keep asking everybody, what if you cannot rely on consented audiences? Like, I know in the US, we had this chat recently about opt-outs across different states and do not sell, do not share in California. But if you end up in an opt-in scenario and you could avoid it, and avoid the small sample sizes by working with correlations and aggregated data. And as you said, something I hadn't thought is that retailers are probably going to start off being much more careful than publishers when it comes to their brands and privacy. Any last thought on ideas or anything that people should know about retail media that you want to get off your chest?
I guess I would just go back to like the what we discussed on like retail media should be treated as both a relationship business. And one of the things that, we need to start thinking about is how do you get to that convergence? How do you actually create an omnichannel experience? And I think we need to start looking about how do you deliver return in relationship? How should you, with that objective in mind, how should brands be looking at their organizational mapping? Like, what is my organizational structure to ensure that there is alignment across my shopper team, my sales team, my media team, my national team? Because right now they're not talking to each other and they're all in. Everyone's like, where's the money coming from? Which I think is a really boring question because it's been asked tons of times. And I think what we need to be asking is like, what happens when multiple departments are investing in retail media, but they're not talking to each other? And there's billions of dollars just in the line that like there's no communication, which kind of just seems a little crazy. And brands are starting to realize that they need to have that internal communication so that when they go into the JVP negotiations, it's not just a JVP negotiation on trade. It's a JVP negotiation on like, how can my trade investment supplement my retail media investment and vice versa? Because consumers are not, they're not siloed. Consumers are experiencing everything at once. And I think that, when we think about retail media going into next year is really how can I deliver an improved return relationship when I'm planning with a retailer to deliver that optimal consumer experience?
Jeffrey, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all for today. And you will find some episode notes and links to our social channels on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.